In today's video, we're going to get caught up with the Flesh Eater Courts. Now, if you're not familiar, I already did a week-long series covering this faction some time ago, and it's actually one of my absolute favorite books, so I'm going to leave a link in the description down below for you to catch up on that. I do suggest if you're new to the faction entirely, watching those videos before this one, because frankly, most of that lore, I would dare say nearly all of it, is exactly the same. The new book that just came out added a few things that make it a bit more interesting, a bit more relevant to the current timeline, but all of the things that we covered in the week of lore are still very much accurate. That being said, I had a chance to dive into the new book, and we have some new things to discuss that we're going to tackle in these next two videos. These are, of course, the events of the Necroquake and the events of the Soul Wars and the ramifications of all of that drama and the implications for this specific army. And in the next video, we're going to cover the Archregent and the rise of the Grand Courts. The first Flesh Eater Court battletome came out in 2016, long before kind of our newer understanding of the realms themselves. Of course, long before the Soul Wars or Nagash, Legions of Nagash battletome. So I won't retread, their entire lore history here, but one thing I did walk away from that original battletome feeling was that this is a very reclusive army. They're kind of scattered across the realms in little pockets, very isolated. And so if you wanted to have an event or a narrative that took place that affected all of them, it would have to be something really big, which of course the Necroquake and the Soul Wars absolutely was. It would have to be something that would affect them universally because of the scattered and disparate nature of the way the army was written. So a very brief history of the Soul Wars, Necroquake, and all that stuff for folks who are new, and I also have a video dedicated to this as well. It's a couple hundred years after the opening of AOS, when we sieged the Realm Gates and the Realm Gate War series went down. Nagash wants to become a major player in the fate for the realm, so he constructs a massive pyramid made from the Realm Stone of Shyish. This is pure solidified death magic. The idea was to siphon all death magic into himself, raise every dead body in every realm at once under his command, and with that he was going to take out the armies of order, destruction, and chaos all at once. At that point, it's just Nagash versus the other Chaos Gods, and he felt pretty confident about that. Well, things didn't go as planned. Skaven infiltrated the Black Pyramid and kind of foiled and corrupted the spell so that it only partially worked. Hundreds of thousands of dead were raised across the realms, but not under Nagash's command. In addition to that, a huge shockwave of magic power shot out like a tsunami into every other realm, and this destabilized magic everywhere, and that's how we get things like endless spells. So this is exactly what we needed. We needed a massive universe-wide event that every Flesh Eater Court empire can feel, and it gets them all on the same page, right? It brings them away from that very small, tiny, isolated faction that doesn't do anything grand in the narrative and bring them into the larger story arc. So in this video, we're going to discuss how those events affected them, and they are deeply affected by the events of the Necroquake. First off, they saw the dead rising across all the realms as this holy display. Again, they are a death faction. They are largely infused with death magic, even though everyone but the Ghoul King and stuff is alive. They're just corrupted. They're infused with this death magic. So when all these dead start flinging up across the realms, they see it as this grand awakening, this big religious resurgence. What they perceived as being the day of ascension when all their fallen brothers and sisters come back and fight with them honorably was actually just the Night Haunt army being formed. Because we have to remember the delusions that they experienced, that I went to in detail in that last series, change everything in their perception. Where a human sees a Night Haunt army attack and slaughter everyone, the Flesh Eater Courts see the Night Haunt as farmers and peasants offering their harvest for the Empire to eat. Which makes sense, right? So murdering bodies, leaving them there, in their mind, is the farmer bringing his produce to the market, and everyone in the Empire gets to eat it. Some Flesh Eater Courts see the Night Haunt as ghosts of their dead brothers and elders, so these are leaders to be respected and followed, and they largely fight alongside them. The hiccup in this plan is that because Nagash didn't have command of all the undead that were raised, occasionally the Night Haunt will, if there's no other targets nearby, turn on the Flesh Eater Courts. Of course, given the choice between fighting the living humans and the Flesh Eater courts, they will attack the humans. The Flesh Eater courts just stink of death magic, and so they're kind of lower on the target priority list. But if there is no one else around, they will attack the Flesh Eater court units. And the Flesh Eater courts, in their delusions, see this as like jovial combat games between rival kingdoms. And when a Flesh Eater court unit dies, they see it as them just retiring for the evening to rest. Kind of like how rival nations in our world had games and gladiatorial events and that kind of stuff to come together and pit each other again in combat. But it wasn't really like all-out war, that kind of thing. Now, keeping the theme on their delusions, right, how their delusions affect their perception of these grand events that are happening everywhere, at this point, Nagash raised Lady Olynder from the grave to lead the Night Haunt, because he wanted them to have a central leader, and he just didn't want to focus on that at the moment. Well, just as they see the Night Haunt all around them as this, time of resurgence, and all these great things are happening, and our brothers and sisters are coming back to us, when they look upon Lady Olynder, they see her as a beacon of hope. Normally, she would instill the deepest fear and remorse in any mortal, but their delusion protects them from this. She is a graceful beauty, so angelic that her feet do not even touch the ground. Many Flesh Eater courts follow her procession just to be in her presence. And the book focuses on Lady Olynder, but then gives a quick shout out that they do this for the other Mortarchs as well. Manfred, Neferata, Archon the Black. But I think the book makes a point of singling out Lady Olynder because her rise coincides with the rise of the Night Haunt, right? It's all kind of this big event culminating, and she's the leader of this great thing. Now, at the same time as all of this is happening and they're seeing all their dead come back to them, the Necroquake affected them in a very different way as well. If you are not familiar with the Realm of Death, Shyish, it's a very interesting place. It's a place that is a collection of different afterlives. For example, if you and your culture, your tribe, had a vision of heaven and hell, for example, just whatever your particular afterlife is, it will take literal form in Shyish, so that when you die, you do go to your heaven, your culture's perception of heaven, or your culture's perception of hell. And it will exist in a real way until everyone from your culture passes away and there's no one to imagine or believe in those things anymore, and it will kind of fade and your spirits will drift into being part of the greater power that is Shyish. So what this really means is that every society's, again, perception of the afterlife, whatever that might be, is accurate, but also somewhat limited. Meaning it only exists as long as there's people alive to believe in it. Well, the Necroquake dramatically altered how the realm functions. Before all of this, a Flesh Eater court person, let's say just a crypt ghoul, would die, and they would enter the paradise of their delusion. They think that they are honorable, good people who will go to whatever, we'll just call it heaven for the sake of kind of easy speech. They'll go to heaven. If they saw themselves as a regal knight, that is how their spirit will project itself when they're in the afterlife. Again, Shyish molded itself to the beliefs of mortals. So even though in life a Flesh Eater court unit is, super nasty, ugly cannibal, tearing stuff apart, wearing bones in their skin, they see themselves as this regal, royal person, and when they die, that is what they become because that's what they believed. Well, since the Necroquake, something was broken in the Flesh Eater court afterlives. Now their cannibalistic tendencies carry with them in death. They have become cannibalistic undead. Think of Night Haunt that eat other Night Haunt. Ghosts eating ghosts. There are entire parts of Shyish that are enraptured by their madness, by their delusions. These phantom Flesh Eater courts now exist because now that kind of belief becoming reality that existed before is somehow broken, and what they are in life, they carry on to being in death. The horror is that sometimes they don't even know that they are dead, and so they fight along with living Flesh Eater courts, tearing into the enemy alongside them. And what this is an escalation of the delusion, virus or magic, however you want to describe it. We kind of tackled it a few different ways in my dedicated Flesh Eater Courts week, where we talked about it's just an infectious belief system that captures people around it. But when that escalates, now it carries on into death, or I guess you could say undeath. In this book, we also receive a new unit, the Archregent, and I'll cover him in my next video because he's an integral part of how the army has developed into a larger threat. And he ties in perfectly when talking about the Grand Courts. When it comes to other minor updates about the Flesh Eater Courts, just adding on to that lore week, like I said, most of the lore is exactly the same, just with some minor tweaks. And things to note are, they kind of moved away from the wording as far as making it seem like a Ghoul King is the sole leader, and it would only make narrative sense to have one Ghoul King in your army. They moved away from that to leave the option, I think, a little bit more open for having multiples lead a particular court, which was a good choice because it makes sense. They are a death army, and the Ghoul Kings are defining characters in it. Beyond that, they did a great job of bringing the army up to speed, putting them in context with current events, and I like that these things affect them, that the Soul Wars and the Necroquake, all those things affect this faction in unique and interesting ways. I think that's really what was needed, and I think it's needed for most of the first round of battletomes that were out. Another thing I can tell you if you are interested in the lore of this faction is that part of it is, I think the writers have a much better understanding of what the realms are actually like now. That it's more concrete than when they actually started writing battletomes when AOS launched, and so it just seems more fleshed out, more interesting, more deep, and more concrete. But at the same time, it still retains and emphasizes what makes the Flesh Eater Courts so amazing. This kind of tragic insanity coupled with terrifying horror. And that's honestly pretty much it for this video. In my next one, we'll talk about the Archregent and the Grand Courts. And again, if you are new to the Flesh Eater Courts lore, check out my playlist down below with all the Flesh Eater Court lore in it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.